Welcome to what is the first in our series of Soundbites and Directors Seminars of this term for the Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL. For those of you, and there are a few in the room who may be new to this series, my name is Dr. Matt Davis. I'm Associate Professor at the IGP, and I'm convener, along with Tracy, who is just here, of this series of events this term. And these events take two forms. So we have 5 lunchtime sound bites, of which this is the first. And these are intentionally non-academics coming to speak to us about real-world challenges, problems, issues that they are dealing and grappling with. And please bring a bite to eat with you. The hint is in the name. These are sound bites, so it's a lunchtime seminar, so please feel free to bring some food. And then we also have a series of 5 directors' seminars, which are on alternate Thursday evenings from 4 till 6. And those are largely academic presentations, maybe a bit more theoretical, but giving a different kind of perspective on some of these key topics and issues. And so I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome Jyoti Fernandes, who is a founder member of the Landworkers Allliance. Come on in, guys. Don't sign the register now. Go on up and it'll be passed around. Jyoti is a founding member of the Landworkers Allliance, and she leads their policy team. And when we were looking for a snapshot to advertise Jyoti's talk, she sent us a wonderful picture of herself embracing Michael Gove with a big, wonderful smile. And it's a fantastic picture. But I didn't want to scare everyone off by a grinning picture of Michael Gove by putting that on our website.
It looks a bit like Gollum in the picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't look great. Anyway, I didn't necessarily think that our audience would be overly attracted by a picture of Gove. So we asked you for another picture. We got a fantastic one of you milking a cow, which looks wonderful. But Jyoti leads the Landworkers Alliance policy team, and for those of you who don't know very much, the Landworkers Alliance is a farmers' union representing agroecological farmers and a wider vision of food sovereignty. The LWA is a member of Via Campesina, which is a global network of small and family farms representing over 200 million peasant farmers worldwide. Jyoti also works for Via Campesina herself, and she is also, as you heard or would have noticed from the picture, a Dorset farmer running a mixed farm that's part of a cooperative selling local food. And you were saying that you milked the cows before you came this morning. Now, this is a person who works in the real world, unlike all of us who just sit and think about it. Jyoti is going to speak about why the LWA formed, how it works to influence food policy in the UK, and how, as a social movement, it lobbies to integrate these ideas into existing government programs. So Jyoti has worked with DEFRA, and hence the Michael Gove photo, is now working with government on the new agriculture bill. Jyoti, over to you.
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to put a picture from our website or something on the thing. But anyway, yeah, my name's Jyoti, yeah, as Matthew said, I have worked for the last 20 years farming. I have 4 daughters, my husband, and we run a farm together. Well, my oldest daughter's now left. She just graduated Oxford and is doing her PhD in agroecology, and hopefully going to come back to the farm as a very well-educated farmer. But yeah, that's her dream. Anyway, yeah. So basically, our farm is based in Dorset. My husband and I started it from scratch. We were new entrants to agriculture. You know, one generation back, my father, coming from India, was from a farming family. He was the oldest in his family, and he was given an education, left India, came to America, went to America to work as an engineer, sent back loads of money to his family to come over and all get an education. You know, put me through university. I studied international development and looked at trade issues. And and then on the other side, my mother's family, they emigrated at the turn of the century from Germany as farmers and ran a big farm in Iowa, which is now still in our family, but tenant farmed, and it's very much turned over to the industrial model. But we're looking at that and trying to turn it back. So on both sides of the family, one generation back, we're from farming families, and it is something that is very prominent in society. Really, is that a lot of people used to work the land. A lot of people still do work the land, but then we're also moving into an era that's very different from that. And I'm very passionate about moving back to the land, bringing people back to livelihoods that come from what's around them, sourcing things locally from their communities, and looking at what our basic human needs are and trying to base our economy and center our economy around things that really fulfill our basic needs in a way that's very sustainable. Looking at green growth and ways that we can develop the infrastructure that we need to fulfill everything that everybody needs in a way that's very sustainable and keeps the planet going. And my belief is that small-scale agriculture is very much the core of that. So that was part of my choice to go back and learn about farming. We didn't have any money to start our farm, so it was quite a struggle. We kind of traveled around a lot to different farms to learn how to farm. There's a beautiful program called Willing Workers on Organic Farms that you can go and do voluntary work and you can pick up the skills to farm. Then we borrowed money from an ethical bank to get our piece of land. My husband is a builder, so he built our house. We set up all our own electricity. It was quite difficult to kind of start from scratch, putting in all the fencing, all the water, building our house, raising 4 small kids at the same time. It's quite a thing, and it's really influenced me to realize that we were doing something that we felt was quite fundamentally good for society, which is trying to produce local food for local markets, for our communities. My husband also makes furniture. He makes these beautiful handmade chairs and also sells those. And those are things we felt like should be supported by society, but we faced quite a lot of struggle. And we meet people every day trying to do this thing, to try and start farms or run small farms, who find it a real struggle. One, to get the prices that they need in order to make those livelihoods succeed, to get the training secondly, to get the training that they need and the knowledge for running small-scale farms in a profitable way, and a way that produces quite a lot of food and keeps the livelihood going, basically. And thirdly, to get access to land and all the resources you need to get the farm started. And on the basis of seeing that struggle happening with ourselves, all the people who have come through our farm as volunteers, a wide movement of people going back to the land, and then working with people across the world trying to keep their farms running, or think of ways to keep those their livelihoods, which are very much land-based, viable. Those struggles is the basis and the foundation of where our campaigning and lobbying comes from. So, like I said, we started our farm 20 years ago. We faced difficulty with planning permission, which means we were under eviction for the first 4 years of our farm, or danger of eviction, where the eviction notice is being served on us because we built our farm on our own property. And so we had to do some business plans and things to try and prove that we're economically viable in order to be able to stay. And that's really quite a struggle, because right now, the price of food doesn't necessarily match up with the effort that you have to put into it if you're doing it in a way that has high animal welfare standards, or it doesn't use loads of artificial nitrate pesticides or big machinery, right? And that is something that we saw as fundamentally a problem, really, that actually people trying to do this thing should be getting our full support. We met a lot of different farmers who were kind of in the same position as us, who were struggling to make it work, and a lot of young people coming through our farm, learning farming skills from us after we had picked them up and started to run our farm, and felt like there was a real need to get an advocacy organization together that could work to change those conditions somewhat, that could, one, build up respect and the prominence of small-scale producers in a UK context, so that that job that we were doing was more valued. Secondly, to bring forward some of the resources that are out there to create a better food and farming system. Because £3.5 billion is spent by this country every year on food and farming. At the moment, the way that is spent is dictated by EU policy, because all of our policy for our agricultural policy comes through Brussels, through the common agricultural policy that takes place in Europe, and it's kind of skewed in how it's distributed. Because the main way that those payments for agriculture to support our better food and farming system are distributed, it was on the basis of how much land you own. So the majority of it, 2.9 billion of the 3.5 billion, is distributed through what they call Pillar 1 payments, which are a payment per hectare of land that you own. There's no particular requirement to have to produce anything. There's no rules, or there's very few. There's a handful, but there's very few rules about how that food is produced, and there's not any about where it goes to and whether it's affordable or accessible or healthy for the general population. Right? Now, realizing that, we thought, hang on a minute, we're struggling to get our polytunnels up. We're facing eviction for being on our land. We can hardly make it pay to be able to do this. Something's got to be done to change that wider context in which we operate. That 3.5 billion that's out there going to landowners, fueling a concentration of land ownership, making it, so the rich are paid to be richer, fueling more investment in land, making the price of land go up and making it harder for new entrants to get into agriculture. Something's got to be done on a wider policy level to tackle the root causes of what makes it so difficult to become a small producer in this country. So that's the roots of starting the Landworkers Alliance. We are facing this. Lots of people we knew were facing this. And we thought, we can't make our voice heard unless we get ourselves organized. We develop some common positions about what it is that's making it so difficult to do what we do, thinking about potential solutions for that come from our real-world experience of doing this, and then putting our efforts together to develop some collective action to take those ideas, both the problems and the solutions that we present forward in a more strategic way. So in 2012, we started the Landworkers Alliance. We had a room of 12 people. We borrowed a room from Triolis Bank, and 12 people rocked up. We wrote a little constitution, said we wanted to be a union representing the interests of small and medium-scale agroecological farmers. That can be a wide range of different sorts of farms. That can be your traditional family farm, your upland hill farm, or it can be more innovative things like a community-supported agriculture farm. There's a different range of kind of ways that farming runs these days, a lot of which are very much non-profit, community-based, as well as your traditional independent family farm. We wanted to represent the policy interests of those people and also to form a solidarity network amongst ourselves, so that we can also create a culture surrounding small-scale farming. And we have this beautiful calendar, if anyone would like to buy a new calendar with all our artwork, celebrating the history and the art of small-scale farmers. We have wonderful parties. We get together and have ceilidhs and do music and singing together. We do storytelling. We do all sorts of things that build that solidarity amongst ourselves to kind of reinvigorate the cultural traditions that farming and food cultures and community represent. And we do a lot of farmer-to-farmer trainings where we get together and visit each other's farms, and somebody will choose a topic to teach everybody about, and it's a potluck as well, and so everybody will share some produce from the farm. And that solidarity and mutual learning and respect aspect of farming is one very important part of what we do. But the equally important part of what we do is make our voices heard. Take something that has been a marginal concern, I think, in UK society, and try and bring it into the mainstream and help connect up the idea that if we're going to have healthy, affordable food for the population, a homegrown food supply, national food security based on a principle we call food sovereignty, then we need to think more strategically about how to support small-scale farmers and get them the respect that they deserve, and kind of upscale our contribution to where our food security comes from. So there are two key concepts we really work with. One is the idea of food sovereignty. And food sovereignty is, well, basically our vision. I can read it out because I think it kind of crystallizes what we really work for, is that our vision is for a food system that people of all income levels and backgrounds, whether urban or rural, should have access to healthy, regionally produced, affordable food from farmers they can trust. The backbone of this food system should be a vibrant mixture of independent small and medium farms, both traditional family farms and innovative farming models, looking after our landscapes and our communities while producing the food that we need. So we wanted to kind of come up with something that just encapsulated a vision of where we could go with our food system, not just kind of looking at our individual concerns. And we class ourselves as a social movement. You know, if you look at the women's rights movement, the movement for racial equality, all these things, often it's about trying to fight for rights for an interest group. And we are fighting for our rights as small producers, as small farmers across the world, but also we're looking at how that connects up with the wider food system that affects everybody. And that links up with a rights-based approach to the world, to everything, and the idea that there's a basic human right for food, and that everybody has a right to food, and that society should put into place all the things necessary in order to guarantee our basic human rights. And the one we're specifically concerned with is the right to food here. So we have a wider vision than just protecting our interests as a social movement. To try and look at where society gets our food from, and then looking at wider sustainability issues. How does that work with the impacts of climate change? How does it work with future sustainability of land use across the planet? How does it feed into the housing crisis? All of these things. It does link up with the wider, picture of what we do with the resources on our planet. Because what we're really fundamentally about is how we use what's around us to provide for our basic human needs. Food sovereignty is one of those, and then the other thing that we really promote is what's called agroecology. I guess here's the thing about a whole farm agroecology scheme we're promoting. Now we work with Via Campesina, which and Landworkers Allliance is a member of Via Campesina. Via Campesina is an organization. An umbrella organization that globally represents 200 million small-scale farmers across the world. So countries all over the world have membership organizations which are a part of this umbrella organization called Via Campesina. The Landworkers Allliance is the one in the UK. In France, for example, it's Confédération Paysanne. In Romania, we work with Agroecological. Across Africa, almost every country has its own different organizations. India has probably about 20 different Via Campesina organizations. The one in the state of India my father's from alone has 20 million members. The Karnataka State Farmers Union. So these enormous social movements in countries all over the world which have linked up together to create a global platform for pushing forward the values of food sovereignty, a vision very much like what I just read out. In our documents, we put that vision in the language that makes sense in the UK context. In every country where we work, that vision of food sovereignty is translated into the context that makes sense to those situations. So across Latin America, we work with Movimiento Sin Tierra, the farmers' organizations in Cuba, and their language is often very leftist, kind of vision of food sovereignty and protecting that kind of thing. And the language they use might be very different. The way the vision of food sovereignty is translated in Romania will be very different from what it looks like in the middle of Brazil. Because they were under communist regimes for so long, and they're actually fighting for the peasant farmers there were fighting for their survival, in the face of collectivization of their agriculture and their land and things like that. But in all of our contexts, we still work together as small-scale farmers to defend our access to land, to water, to the financial resources to make a fair livelihood, to looking at protecting our markets, all of these things that try and create a vision of food sovereignty and put forward a model of agriculture that's called agroecology. Now, agroecology is a model of farming systems, and it's quite a lot of these are quite complex terms. So, if you have more questions about them later, I can talk about it. But we have a rough division in how we operate with our policy between industrial farming methods and what we call the peasant food web, or the agroecological food web, right? And with agroecological farming, it's the sort of farming that the majority of the world practiced before the 1950s, before the Green Revolution, that started to transition our agriculture towards input-based agriculture, when we started to replace using manure, for fertilizer with artificial nitrate fertilizers, or replacing hand weeding with using chemical herbicides to weed, or instead of using hoes and draft animals, we started to use tractors. That type of type of transition from agricultural systems. And what happened over the 1950s, 60s is that also there was a real transition between farms having multiple products on their farm, growing a wide variety of different crops in mixed farming systems, where you might have your cows and they're grazing and they're producing manure, and that's put onto your vegetable patch, and you might have chickens going around the edges scratching, and some fruit trees, and all this diversity of different products and different crops and saved seed, right, from the land that's produced around you. You're producing food from these mixed systems and selling them to your local communities, and through what we call short supply chains, direct supply chains to our local communities. That kind of system was replaced with larger scale farms, often owned by a larger farmer or a larger corporation, producing a monoculture of crops, using a lot of inputs, a lot of tractors, fossil fuels, artificial nitrates, that type of thing, and selling those products through longer supply chains, through global supply chains, shipping loads of oranges, or shipping loads of sugar, or coffee, or tea, or wheat, that's produced on this kind of monoculture scale all across the planet. And there's very stark differences in the impact of those different models of agriculture on our planet. At the moment, 70% of our global food supply comes from small and medium scale farms agroecologically, providing for 70% of the, not global food supply, but world's food security. So 70% of the food that feeds the world is through small scale agroecological farms. 30% of the food security is provided through larger industrial model farming, right? But conversely, the studies that have been done by the United Nations show that the 30% of the global food supply that's produced through the industrial model of agriculture, and these large supply chains and monocultures and that type of thing, uses 70% of our agricultural resources to produce that 30%, where the 70% of food that is provided for global food security uses 30% of our agricultural resources on the planet. So it's a much more sustainable model, as well as all the numerous other impacts that the industrial food chain has on poisoning waters, on health, using too many antibiotics in agriculture, and herbicide poisoning, and it impacts on animal welfare for these large concentration camps for cows and big chicken farms and things like that. Right, so there's really a problem there, and actually we have roughly equivalent levels of hunger in the world today as we did when we started this transition to industrialized agriculture and the Green Revolution, right? Roughly equivalent. So there has been a real problem with, even though we've got this transition to industrial agriculture, we're not necessarily feeding the world through this model, and we're having huge impacts on our global environment by having this transition, and a huge loss of livelihood by small farms, which increases the gap between rich and poor in most countries, because it's investors, it's the World Bank, it's the IMF, that are benefiting from the profits from these global supply chains, where the livelihoods are often undermined through global supply chains of small-scale producers producing, things through the types of agroecological methods that they're using. And so that divide is getting increasingly, larger. And it means that people don't always have access to food, even though we might have more bulk commodity of food out there in the world today than we've ever had before, right? And so on a global level, Via Campesina, because this has been an enormous global process pushed forward by the Committee on Food Security, by the Food and Agriculture Organization, backed up by loans from the IMF and the World Bank and the structural adjustment policies and all of that, because it's been such a global process, and the voices of all those small-scale producers producing 70% of the global food supply is one of the most marginalized voices that's out there on the planet. Almost half of this planet are small-scale producers. Our organization represents 200 million, but it's actually half of the planet that are small-scale producers. It's one of the most marginalized voices out there, and we had to get together politically in order to take forward this vision for food sovereignty and agroecology, and actually start to reverse that trend and help policymakers and the people working on the highest international levels, trickling right through to national levels down to local levels and to what's happening on the farm, realize that we actually need a massive global transition towards agroecology in order to guarantee long-term food security. And this is something that came to global prominence through the work of the Via Campesina, through the work of the community, through what we call the civil society mechanism, of the Food and Agriculture Organization, and where a lot of my work with the Via Campesina has been to get people on the ground, farmers on the ground, to these international forums to talk about what is actually happening to them in their fields and in their forests and in their waters all across the world. Make sure that those voices can stand there and say, and speak to the agendas of what's actually happening on the international level, influence the programs of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Committee on Food Security. And over the last 20 years, the work of the Via Campesina has fundamentally shifted where that global picture is and where the global priorities are. There was the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Olivier de Schutter, brought forward a very important report that said, we need to transition to agroecology, and there were some important declarations made at the highest international levels with all countries signing up to agreements, like the Paris Climate Change Agreement or something like that, saying all countries must transition towards agroecology. So the work that we do here in the UK with the Landworkers Allliance is to work within that global context, within that framework, within that picture that I've just been explaining to you, to do that here in the UK context, to bring that vision to policymakers here who are actually very caught up in this framework that industrialized agriculture, large-scale agriculture, what we call sustainable intensification, has been the program for our agriculture department for quite a long time, to realize that that is quite outdated. That mode of thinking about agriculture is not the way we move forward for long-term food security. It's very much dominated by large agri-tech companies that go to things like the Oxford Farming Conference and spin loads of tales about how they're going to feed the world through GM. And that type of thing, rather than looking at the facts about global food security, looking at the productivity of figures for small and medium-scale agroecological farms, and thinking about the other impacts that a transition to more large-scale agribusiness-oriented industrialized agriculture has on our society, our access to food, to the kind of economies that circulate around local food as well. So we're trying to bring that to that level, and through our work right now on the agriculture bill, it's really, this is actually moving forward quite rapidly. And so I'm going to stop now with the global picture and trying to talk about what we've been doing as the Landworkers Alliance, what we've been doing through my campaigning and policy work, for the last 3 years really, to try and bring this forward. So basically, within that picture, we started out by talking to all of our membership. We have about 1,000 members. I know that's not huge, but we're only started in 2012. We're all active, small-scale farmers trying to earn our livelihoods through producing food for our local communities. And our members are really on it. They're really active with helping with our policy and campaigning. They really feed us loads of ideas about how we can make policy better and respond a lot to our campaigns. So the first thing we did when we realized Brexit was going to happen is that we got together a lot of policy proposals, because 47% of the budget for that comes from the European Union is for agriculture. 47%, that's almost half of the budget that comes from Europe goes to the Common Agricultural Policy and to agriculture. And the bulk of the work in our relationship with the European Union actually is surrounding our relationship with regards to agriculture, trade in agriculture, and then the finances through the Common Agricultural Policy. Now, through the whole Brexit debate, this was not talked about very much at all. And quite a lot of farmers voted for Brexit, like turkeys voting for Christmas, and we were like, what are you doing? Because your parents all come from the EU. All those landowners that voted for Brexit were just like, oh my God, what have I done? Not even thinking about it. They were like, oh, we don't want those regulations like, banning glyphosates that the European Union puts in place. Their funding comes from the EU. These massive checks that go out to the big farms, they all come from the EU, right? And so, in a way, we were really not happy with Brexit at all, because of the foundation of a lot of the votes against Brexit and things were based on stuff we thought was really dodgy. But it was an opportunity for us to think about this system that we were not happy with, the system that came from the European Union that paid landowners to own land, basically, and post some alternatives and put forward a better way that we could support the type of food system we wanted to see through our agricultural policy. Now, some of what you do when you look at agricultural policy is about payments, but a lot of it's also about regulation and about things like protectionism, putting in taxes like tariffs on food that's imported to a lower cost, or trade rules that stop imports to lower standards. as well as the payments that go out to farmers. We wanted to input on all of these things, because if you're going to get a farming policy that aligns with a better food policy to deliver a sustainable, just food system for everybody, then it has to be a combination of loads of different measures designed towards a clear policy objective, which is a better, more socially just, fair food system delivering healthy, affordable, sustainably produced food to everyone. That's kind of the goal, right? And so we kind of put together this thing with all these key policy proposals. Now, because all of us are farmers, everybody that works for the Landworkers Alliance are active farmers. In order to do this and to sort of put out fancy documents like this, the time together to do all this kind of thing, we had to do a lot of fundraising. We did a big crowdfunder, tried to talk to loads of people about the fact that we needed to get people on the ground, mobilized, to be able to speak up for our rights to a better food system. And we got loads of people to donate money, which helped pay a salary for some of the people on our campaigning team. So I get paid, 2 days a week to kind of do this work. There's some other people on our team, paid half day a week each, really, to kind of do this work. So I think we've been able to achieve quite phenomenal things. We've been able to do that. So what we did when we started, we did this thing, which all of you have been able to see, I hope. I won't take you through it all because I only have 5 minutes. Apparently, I've been told. But what we did was we mapped out where does it lay, where does our the power lay to try and actually shift and change this policy. Right. First, we met with loads of the civil servants at DEFRA. Well, we started out with a mobilization. Loads of us did a big, feast in front of DEFRA, and brought our policy document and talked to everybody coming through the door, like handing it to it. Nobody could get into the building. Just recently we just had a big march called the More Farmers, Better Food March, where we had about 600 farmers and a tractor and loads of people, all of Parliament going across Westminster Bridge, shouting for better food farming. Loads of kids dressed as vegetables. It was awesome. Buses full of teens, heading for Westminster. The mobilisation was one thing, but then that sparked up. We got the attention of the civil servants, partly by being outside the door offering them loads of food. So they actually read our report instead of pushing delete when we sent it through their inbox. They started to meet with us. We met with the top tier of them. Then we started trying to talk to different policymakers about it. We've been mobilising our members to go talking to their MPs about our policy ideas. And I think we're having tremendous impact because we try and come up with really concrete proposals that mirror and match things that will slot into existing things. So, for example, what we've been doing with this agricultural bill now is we've been going and talking to loads of MPs. We mobilised a campaign where we had 3,200 and something people write to their MPs to try and put agroecology and local food into the bill, right? That resulted in us and we started doing loads of meeting with the Labour Party and various MPs, and the ones that started to trickle back responses to it. We've been going and meeting with them. That resulted in the Labour Party now, this is really great news, I'm so excited about this, decided to table for debate in Parliament at the report stage for this new agriculture bill, these amendments, and one of them which is putting into the bill a clause that says supporting agricultural and horticulture businesses in enabling public access to healthy food that's farmed sustainably, including food produced through whole farm agroecological systems, right? They've decided to table that as their top amendment. It's been done by Jeremy Corbyn, Stu Hayman, David Drew, Jenny Chapman, all the top Labour front bench, basically. So we have high hopes that they're going to mobilise because they're going to put their whip behind it to get everybody there to vote for it, right? Now, we managed to achieve them putting that in, an amendment that we wrote and sent to them and went and talked to them because we had people behind us. We had all those people writing to our MPs, mobilising out on the streets of Westminster in our tractors, giving them really concrete arguments and legitimate things, finding out the right timing for them to be able to get this stuff forward, and then they're going to put that in. Now, whether or not that actually passes, whether Brexit or not goes through, the fact is, by having a debate in the House of Commons on that, we've also managed to get tabled another cross-party amendment on agroecology, mentioning it specifically, plus another one on local food systems, which we think is tremendously important, right? All of these ones which we wrote and talked to MPs and negotiated with them to put forward a table for us for debate in Parliament. Whether or not they go through, we've raised the profile of those issues. And then what we're trying to do after that is put forward very concrete proposals to be tested and trialled to DEFRA that match the political fuss that's going on, right? So we want to make sure that debate will happen about whole farm agroecological systems, right? And so we put out a proposal last week for the whole farm agroecology scheme, right? Putting together all the measures that could be financially incentivized. Rather than paying landowners to own land, we want them to pay farmers to do all these different things, encouraging biodiversity, decreasing agrochemical use, adapting to and mitigating climate change, building soil health, increasing accessibility and affordability of food, integrating the community, increasing the quality and quantity of jobs, enhancing economic resilience, building soil health, all of these things that will be financially rewarded for farmers to do, rather than being paid simply for owning land. It's about the system that they farm with and who that food goes to, right? So we wanted to make this very, very concrete. So last week, we had a conference called the Oxford Real Farming Conference. There's two. There's the Oxford Farming Conference, dominated by agrotech companies, and the Oxford Real Farming Conference, right? And we managed to get Michael Gove to come to the Oxford Real Farming Conference. He went last year, which is where I got that cheesy picture of us, come and speak to the crowd, people asking him specifically, what are you going to do about promoting new entrants into agriculture? What are you going to do about supporting horticulture specifically? How are you going to promote the whole farm agroecology scheme, right? And there was over 1,000 farmers there in the room talking to Michael Gove, asking him questions on the things. After that question and answer session, I went as the head of the policy team to have lunch with Michael Gove. And I said, sorry, since last year, we've been really supportive of these reforms, but we've had a real problem because you're putting forward tests and trials for your new environmental land management schemes to replace the payments that come from the European Union, and we haven't been put on the advisory panel. We want to put forward this whole farm agroecology scheme. What are you going to do about it? And he was like, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that you guys weren't on the team. You totally should be on the team, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, look, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to make sure I'm on the panel? I want to be on the advisory panel, And I made him say it 3 times, and he kept saying, yes, of course. But can you make it happen? And he's like, yes, of course. So it was great. So this week, I've had emails from the 3 of the top advisors arranging for a meeting for us to talk about the whole farm agroecology scheme. They asked for a breakdown of how much we'd need to test and trial it. So I was working on the train on the way here, quite strategically about what kind of funding we need to trial this on different sizes and scales of farms, what kind of measures, what kind of diagnostic tools we need to implement this. And all of this is backed up by the fact that we said, look, we had, X number of people writing in, we have this, we've had all these MPs, I'm going to put a formal letter into place saying that you committed to saying that you would help us push forward this whole farm agroecology scheme, and CC in all of Jeremy Corbyn, all of the MPs that we talked to, everybody else, to make sure they keep questioning at question time. What have you done about the whole farm agroecology scheme? It seems to be terribly popular, that kind of thing. So we're trying to use all the forces that we can get through grassroots mobilization, channeled and strategically put into place so that we can push these schemes forward. But at the heart of it, these schemes come from our members. They come from our experience that we've lived and what we need to try and get these global shift towards sustainable agriculture. So you can join us. You can write to your MPs because there's still time, because the vote is probably going to be end of January on this. And you can also stay in touch with the Landworkers Allliance. We have, beyond us, we have another organization that we work with called A People's Food Policy, which is a broader framework for a people's food policy. We work with 170 different organizations on developing a joint vision of what we need to create a better food system. And that touches on lots of things, not just support for farmers. We're one element of that wider picture. So if you wanted to join into that and working with people's food policy, you're very much welcome, because you all eat. Thank you.
Jyoti, thank you for a wonderfully informative, exciting, to my mind, inspirational